An old woman was shoved to the ground in a crowded subway car. No one said a word. Not a single hand reached out. Only averted gazes and the sound of steel wheels screeching through the darkness. It was an ordinary Monday morning. Like so many other mornings when Lena Monroe, 67 years old, headed to the market early, bought a few apples, a loaf of bread, and a jar of strawberry jam. She had taken this same subway line for the past 10 years, ever since Caleb retired from the police force and the two of them moved into a small apartment near Harlem. She never asked for much. Just to keep the habit of making a warm breakfast, waiting for him to wake up slowly, making coffee together, and reading the newspaper through reading glasses. But today, something was off. Not the flickering lights overhead, not the faint music leaking from someone's earbuds, but the silence hanging in the air, dense and heavy, as if something was about to break. Lena stood near the door, pressed close to the wall, clutching her old canvas tote tightly to her chest. Across from her sat a young man sprawled across 2 seats, AirPods in, phone in hand, hoodie pulled low. When she gently bowed her head and said, "Excuse me, may I sit here?" He smirked. "Train's crowded. Lady, everyone's got their spot." Then he stretched his legs out, deliberately blocking the path. A middle-aged man nearby glanced over, then looked away. A schoolgirl hesitated, raising her phone's camera, then put it down. No one did a thing. Lena didn't argue. She simply stood there, still holding her bag, legs slightly shaking as the train curved around a bend. The screech of wheels on the track caused her to stumble, her shoulder accidentally brushing against his arm. He turned sharply and snapped, "Don't touch me, old hag." The words weren't loud, but enough to make a few earbuds slip out, enough to make a few eyes glance up, then quickly drop. A moment later, he leaned toward her tote bag, poked it with his fingers, and sneered, "What's in here, Granny?" No one stopped him. No one said a thing. 2 apples rolled across the floor. The loaf of bread slid out of place. Lena knelt down to pick them up. He stomped on one of the apples, crushing it completely. Dark red juice spread like a small pool of blood. And that was when Caleb Monroe, the man in the worn cowboy hat who had been silently standing at the end of the car from the start, lifted his head. He had seen everything. And now he began to walk forward. No one knew who he was. They only saw a tall figure, old leather jacket, grey beard, and eyes deep as the New York night. Not fast, not in a hurry. Just step by step, like something inevitable had awakened. The number 6 subway train still roared beneath New York City, carrying hundreds of tired, silent lives as always. But today, that silence was torn apart by the cruel stomp of a red apple. The kind of silence that made it hard to hear your own heartbeat tighten, but made it all too easy to hear the arrogance of someone who had just crushed an old woman's dignity. And, from the back of the car, he began to walk forward. Caleb Monroe, 71 years old, slender but steady, wearing a faded brown leather jacket, cowboy hat shadowing part of his gaze. He said nothing, just placed one foot after another through a crowd holding its breath. Past a mother clutching her child to her chest. Past a college student gripping the strap of his backpack. Past a young woman holding up her phone. no longer daring to press record. Each of his steps seemed to press into the floor with the weight of a lifetime that refused to bow down. Caleb had once been a decorated police officer, commended for solving major cases, but quietly walked away after witnessing a partner die right in front of him. Since then, he chose silence, chose to live as just another man. He didn't like conflict. He didn't like attention. But he never turned away when something was wrong. Lena, the woman he'd met when he was 22, was the only reason he still walked through this world every morning. She wasn't a strong woman, but she was gentle in a way this whole city had long forgotten. She believed in something called courtesy, in the idea that people could still be kind to one another even on cold, in different trains, and that trust had just been trampled on, not just by a shoe, but by cruelty, brazen, unchecked. Caleb knew he couldn't stay silent, even if he was just an old husband with no authority, no badge. But he still had a straight back and a voice to be used when it needed to be heard. He stopped just a few steps away from the young man. No one in the subway car said a word. Phones began to rise. Eyes began to follow him, not because he was familiar, but because they wanted to know, what would this man do? The young man looked up and saw the old man standing there, eyes like mist. He smirked. "What's up?" Grandpa Caleb didn't answer. He simply looked down at the floor where the crushed apple lay in a smear of leaking jam, then turned to his wife. "Are you hurt?" His voice was low, calm, but it made the entire car hold its breath. Lena nodded gently. "A little." Just 3 words. But they struck like a spark touching a bed of dry tinder. Caleb looked up. His eyes were no longer soft. They were the eyes of a man who had seen both the best and worst of humanity and had chosen to stand on the side of what was right. This was no longer about an apple, no longer about an old woman being shoved. It was the final boundary of a husband watching his wife humiliated while an entire subway car turned away. The young man shot to his feet. He was half a head taller than Caleb, 40 years younger, chest puffed like he was performing on a stage. But in Caleb's eyes, he wasn't a threat, just a boy who had never learned to control his strength and had never been taught respect. "What now? You think you can order me around?" He scoffed, turning to the entire car, shouting like he was delivering a punchline. "This old man thinks he's a cop or something. Or maybe he's the husband of this granny." Caleb didn't flinch. He simply repeated his first words, this time slower, clearer. "Pick up the bag and apologize to my wife." In that moment, someone hit record. A schoolboy began to breathe heavily. A young mother placed her hand on her trembling daughter's shoulder. The young man scoffed. "No one told me I had to apologize. She bumped into me first." "You shoved her," Caleb replied. "I saw it. Everyone saw it." Silence fell over the subway car like a heavy velvet curtain, smothering all outside noise. No one said a word. No one came to the young man's defense. He raised his eyebrows, eyes darting. Then, instinctively, he called out, "Yo, we'll get over here." From a seat near the middle of the car, another figure stood up, big, in a puffy jacket, jaw clenched like he could bite the air in half. He walked over, eyeing Caleb up and down as if appraising a used item. "You got a problem, old man." "I've got a principle," Caleb answered. "When someone gets hurt, the one who caused it should take responsibility." Lena still stood behind her husband, clutching the strap of her worn-out bag. One apple was crushed, the jar of jam scratched, nearly shattered, and the worst pain was the silence of everyone around them. Now the two young men had formed a flank, one cocky, the other threatening. But Caleb didn't back down. He stepped forward half a pace, locking eyes with the first young man. "I don't care who you think you are," Caleb said. "All I know is today, you crossed a line." The bigger guy laughed. "What line, old man? This is New York. Weak ones get left behind. Dinosaurs like you don't belong on this train." That sentence landed like a blade, not just at Caleb, but at every elder, every vulnerable person who'd ever been shoved into a corner of the subway and ignored. Still, Caleb didn't raise his voice. He simply asked, his tone low and steady, "Do you have a mother?" The guy flinched. "What?" "A sister. Ever seen someone you love get treated like trash?" The entire train seemed to hold its breath. Caleb continued, "If you have, then you should know. This is when you stop. For the first time." The young man didn't respond right away. He blinked, head tilted slightly downward, just enough to reveal hesitation. But then, true to the nature of those who live off their own ego, the young man snapped, "Who do you think you are? Some kind of superhero?" And he shoved Caleb in the chest. Caleb stepped back half a pace, not because of the force, but because he had learned long ago how to absorb conflict without feeding it. But this time the eyes in the subway car had changed. No longer indifferent, now waiting to see how long would this man endure. The shove didn't knock Caleb down, but it touched the most sacred part of him, the safety of the one he loved. And the most dangerous moment is not the strike itself, but when the last thread of patience snaps. Lena softly called out Caleb. Her voice was small but taut, like a string pulled too tight. Her eyes, old, in pain, looked at her husband, not with fear, but with understanding. She knew he was holding something in. A man nearby took a step back. A young woman covered her mouth. Someone pressed record, but no one intervened. The young man, now with his buddy beside him, stepped closer, brought his face near Caleb's. "So what? Old man, you got a problem? Gonna hit me?" Caleb didn't answer. His eyes were deep, still, like a dark well without light, but full of gravity. He turned to Lena. "Are you still hurting?" "Just a little," she whispered, still clutching her canvas bag as if it held her last shred of dignity. Caleb nodded, then looked the young man straight in the eye. "You hurt her. Now it's time to make that right." The young man burst into laughter, elbowing his friend. "You hear that? This old man thinks he's somebody." And then, to prove his power, he bent down, picked up the last apple on the floor with 2 fingers, and let it drop right in front of Lena. The apple rolled gently, then split-open juice seeping into the grime of the subway floor. He reached into the bag, pulled out the jar of jam, shrugged. Oops. Butterfingers. And let it fall. Crack. The sound of shattering glass exploded like a quiet bomb, one that echoed deep into the gut. Strawberry jam spilled out like blood, thick, red, spreading across the filthy steel floor. Lena stood frozen. The whole subway car froze. Caleb looked down, then slowly raised his head and asked, "Do you have a mother?" The young man flinched slightly. "What did you say?" "A sister ever seen a woman humiliated?" He fell silent. A few people in the car started glancing at each other, their eyes no longer indifferent. They were witnessing something far beyond an argument. Caleb tilted his head. "If you have, then you should know this is where you stop." No raised voice, no threat. Just a single sentence, but it reflected the full measure of the man standing before him. The young man clenched his fists. His fingers trembled slightly. For the first time, he didn't seem sure what to do next. But then, like those who never learned their limits, he chose to escalate. "Get the hell out of here, old man," and he shoved harder. This time, Caleb took a full step back. No resistance, no dodging. He let the force pass through him like wind through a tree, but in his eyes, something had changed. No longer quiet observation, but readiness. And in that very moment, the train jolted slightly as it curved. Not from the tracks, but from the air itself, shifting around a decision that was about to be made. From a far corner, someone else stood up. No one had noticed him until now. He wore a hoodie, hands still in his pockets. And when he stepped forward, his eyes didn't smile, didn't shout, just cold. In his hand was not a fist, but a solid plastic baton, the kind only private security staff usually carried. He walked through the crowd like a ghost, and before anyone could react, thud. The baton struck Caleb square in the temple. The sound wasn't loud like fireworks. There was no metal clash, no glass shattering, just a heavy, muted thud like a club slamming into soft earth. But it was enough to freeze the entire subway car. Caleb collapsed. No scream, no cry. Just one knee buckling, his right shoulder slamming into a pole, then sliding down to the floor like a man pulled down by the gravity of pain itself. Caleb Lena screamed, her voice shattering like glass. She rushed to him, dropping to her knees, both hands on his chest, her face frozen in panic. A man nearby blurted out, Did he kill him?" A woman's voice choked through tears. No, he's still breathing." The subway car burst into sound, not noise, but chaos. Some people screamed. Someone dropped a phone. The schoolgirl sobbed into her mother's arms. The man with the baton didn't smile, didn't shout. He just breathed evenly, as if this was just another part of his job. as if he hadn't just brought a man to the ground, but simply cleared an obstacle from the way. He looked around, saying nothing, but his eyes seemed to say, "There, problem solved." Caleb lay still. Blood dripped from his temple, tracing down his cheek, soaking into the collar of his worn leather jacket. Beside him, Lena clutched his hand, trembling. "Charles, Charles, wake up. I'm here." He didn't respond. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. Then a finger moved. Just barely, but enough for the sobbing woman beside him to cling to it like it was life itself. Caleb opened his eyes. Not wide, not fully. Just a soft lift of his eyelids, enough to see the blurred ceiling of the train and his wife's tear-soaked face above him. He blinked once, then again, and his breathing steadied. The entire train held its breath, not with fear anymore, but with anticipation. The man with the baton stepped back, lifted it again, ready to end it. Lena jumped up, shielding Caleb with her body. "Don't." Her voice wasn't loud, but it rang out like a bell in a dead forest. For the first time, she wasn't just a quiet wife. She was the shield against the wind when it blew too hard for her husband to stand alone. The man with the baton scowled, voice gruff. "Step aside, old lady. This doesn't concern you." But he hesitated just one beat too late, because behind her, Caleb placed one elbow on the floor, braced himself, and rolled over. With his other hand, he grabbed the subway pole, dragging his bloodied body upward inch by inch as if he had fallen before, had known pain before, had failed before, and had always gotten back up just like this. One step, then another. The train car held its breath. No one screamed, no one cheered. Only the sound of blood dripping from Caleb's temple, drop by drop, soaking into his collar. And his eyes no longer the eyes of an ordinary man. They were the eyes of someone still standing when the rest of the world had fallen apart. Caleb stared directly at the man holding the baton. No words, no roar, just a slight clench of his right fist, the same hand that once wrote reports, cuffed criminals, held his firstborn, now speaking for him in a way no words could. "Now, it's my turn." The man with the baton didn't back down. He gripped the handle tighter, eyes locked on Caleb, who now stood firm, blood trailing from his temple, but his back unbent, gaze sharp like a blade forged in time. No one said a word. No one looked away. Everyone waited to see. What would this man do after being brought to his knees? The attacker struck first. The baton swung this time, aiming directly for Caleb's shoulder, swift and precise, like a blow meant to dominate in front of a crowd. But Caleb didn't dodge. He stepped forward, just one step. A short distance, just enough to throw the strike off balance. He raised his left hand, catching the attacker's wrist mid-air. No yanking, no twisting, just holding like a pillar bracing against the wave. The man gasped for air. He tried to pull back, couldn't. Then Caleb turned, pivoting his hips. He guided the man's arm along its own momentum. The baton dropped, clack, rolling once across the subway floor. It felt like all the air had been sucked out of the train. A woman burst into tears. A man whispered, "My God." He hasn't thrown a single punch. The attacker staggered back, trying to counter, but Caleb took another step forward. He placed one hand gently on the man's chest, not forceful, not aggressive, just placed it, then pushed. The man fell backward, hitting the subway pole, sliding down like a torn sack of sand. Caleb didn't chase, didn't kick. He just stood there in the middle of a subway car, now trembling with a silence heavier than any explosion. Then he turned and looked straight at the first young man, the one who had stomped on the apple and shoved his wife. They were still there, all three of them, but not one of them was laughing anymore. The second guy, the big one with the round face, stepped forward like a human shield. He roared, "We're not scared of you," then charged shoulders down, arms wide, like he was going to bulldoze Caleb with sheer size. Caleb waited. Just 1 second before the impact, he sidestepped, half a step to the left, a twist of the hips. The guy missed, stumbled over his own friend's foot, and boom, slammed into a bench seat. The sound hit like a sack of concrete crashing onto metal. Caleb turned still without a punch, still without a shout, just gripped his wife's hand tighter as he passed her, his eyes delivering a promise that needed no words. The first guy backed away. His mouth hung open, not from fear of being hit, but from something he couldn't understand. How could a man, bleeding, still stand, still be calm, still have absolute control? No one in the train looked away. Phones were filming, but no one remembered they were recording. They weren't watching for entertainment. They were witnessing something rare, integrity, made visible. A schoolgirl grabbed her mother's hand. "Mum, who is he?" The mother just shook her head, eyes red. "Someone we've wished would show up for a very long time." Caleb stood tall, looked at the big guy struggling to get up. "You want to keep going?" The guy shook his head. For the first time in his life, he couldn't meet the eyes of an old man. Caleb didn't smile. He didn't need victory. He only needed closure. But fate wasn't done yet, because in the corner, the fourth man, the one who had struck Caleb earlier, was rising again. The fourth man, the one who had clubbed Caleb in the head, still refused to stop. He staggered upright, right hand gripping the pole, left hand at his side. His eyes, no longer cold. They were bloodshot, burning with the rage of humiliation. No more weapon, no more surprise. Only raw fury and the ego of a man who'd never been properly taught a lesson. He charged, no technique, no form. Just primal violence, both fists clenched, mouth spewing wordless sounds, roaring like a wild beast. Caleb didn't step back. He stepped in, not fast, not rushed. Just enough to rotate into the oncoming strike, turning the attacker's momentum into empty space. His left hand swept the opponent's arm aside. His right arm wrapped beneath the armpit, not to twist, not to choke, but to redirect. A pivot of the hips, a push across the shoulder. The man staggered, slamming his side into the subway pole. And then, the air cracked like a wave breaking. The man spun back, furious, swinging wildly. Caleb slipped aside. A second punch. He tilted, letting it graze past his cheek. Then, boom, a short, sharp elbow to the lower abdomen. The man gasped as if his breath had been shattered. His eyes bulged. Spittle flew. He dropped to one knee. Caleb didn't stop. He stepped back half a stride, dropped his shoulder, moved in like someone who knew exactly what to do. A shoulder press into the chest, a quick leg sweep behind the knee. Thud. The man slammed backward onto the floor, the back of his head hitting the steel, not hard enough to knock him out, but hard enough to make him stay down. This time, he didn't get back up. Not because of the pain, but because he knew there was nothing left to stand for. The whole train fell silent. No one moved. Only the steady hum of the subway engine reminding them the world was still turning. Even as time itself had seemed to freeze inside that car, Caleb turned his head. Now, his eyes no longer held fire. Just calm, the calm after the storm. The calm of a man who had proven what he needed to prove and didn't need applause. He walked slowly back toward his wife. Lena was still standing there, eyes red, hands trembling. Caleb picked up the torn canvas bag, now holding just one bruised apple and a half-broken jar of jam. He handed it to her. "You still want to make breakfast?" She nodded, a faint smile on her lips, shaky but filled with pride. A little girl whispered to her mother, "Mom, is he a superhero?" The mother held her daughter close and answered, "No, he's just a husband." The train hadn't reached the next stop, but someone had already put down their phone. Someone closed an iPad. Someone removed their earbuds. No one clapped. No one cheered. Only their eyes spoke, the eyes of people who had just witnessed the right thing done. Not for fame, not for revenge, but simply because it was right. Caleb stood in the center of the subway car. Silver hair, blood-stained coat, one hand gripping the trembling fingers of the woman he loved. And now, no one saw him as an old man. He was a living definition of courage. The train began to slow. The screech of metal on rails rang out like a long exhale after a silent storm. Above them, the voice of the announcement system echoed, "Next stop, Lexington and 63rd. Lena gently squeezed Caleb's hand. He squeezed back, saying nothing. On the floor, 3 men groaned. One clutched a broken arm. Another held his gut like something inside had been torn out. The third slumped against a pole, eyes shut, no trace of arrogance left behind. The fourth, the one who had used the baton, remained still, not unconscious, but awakened, realizing everything he thought he knew about power was wrong. Caleb didn't look at them. He never took his eyes off Lena, as if the whole battle had existed within one small circle drawn around her, a boundary no one would ever cross again. When the train doors slid open, the morning light spilled in, shining on the blood at his temple, the wrinkled coat, and the calloused hand still holding the torn grocery bag. He turned to his wife and asked softly, "Ready I am," she whispered, "as long as you're with me." Caleb nodded. The 2 elderly figures stepped off, slowly. No one pushed, no one blocked. Everyone in the car instinctively stepped aside, forming a path not out of fear, but out of respect. A young man who had been filming lowered his phone. He didn't press save. A girl quietly removed her earbuds, then bowed her head. Just a little. A man in a suit, still wearing a Bluetooth earpiece, took it out and exhaled. A mother pulled her daughter close, whispering as if she meant it for a lifetime. Remember, if the day comes when you must stand up for someone, remember him. Caleb and Lena stepped onto the platform. The stone floor was cold, the fluorescent lights pale, and the draft blowing from the tunnel behind felt like it was pushing time backward. The train doors closed behind them. Thud. But no one inside moved. No one spoke. No one reached for a button. They just stood there, in stillness, in shock, in a moment unlike anything they had ever seen. A boy, maybe 12, tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mom, was that really Caleb Monroe?" The mother looked toward the closed doors, where the faint silhouettes of the two figures still lingered on the glass. She nodded softly. "Yes, and that's why he doesn't need applause." In the train car, 4 men lay slumped, but no one mocked them. No one took photos. Because everyone now understood this wasn't a clip to share. This was a memory to remind them when an entire train turns its back, there must always be one who turns around. Caleb didn't know he was being watched, or maybe he did, but didn't care. He just reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled note, the shopping list Lena had written that morning, now stained with blood. Caleb looked at it as if it were a map guiding him home. "Still want to get apples if there are any good ones left." Lena smiled, her voice soft and catching. "I'll find them," he said. They walked along the platform. No one called their name. No one asked for a photo. Just 2 elders hand in hand passing through the aftermath of a confrontation, leaving behind nothing but profound silence, and a lesson no one would forget. As Caleb and Lena emerged from the subway station, morning light brushed across the moss-covered stone steps. Drops of dew still clung to the steel railing. Weak sunlight filtered through the silver-grey mesh overhead, casting a glow that felt both real and like something remembered. Their final step onto the sidewalk brought no fanfare, no cheers, only the sound of car horns, a bus tire gently grinding against the curb, and a newspaper vendor calling out the morning headlines. Caleb lowered the brim of his cowboy hat, not to hide the blood at his temple, but to avoid having to explain anything at all. No one on the street knew what had just happened beneath the city. No one recognized the old man holding a torn canvas bag as the man who had just defended a dignity no one else dared to touch. A group of high school students crossed the street, laughing loudly. A man smoked a cigarette, eyes glued to his phone. An elderly woman pulled her grocery cart along, paying no mind to the couple walking quietly beside her. Lena walked slowly next to Caleb. Her hand still trembled slightly, but there was no fear, because in her other hand she held tightly to the familiar hand that had steadied her for decades. "Do you think," she asked softly, "the people down there will be okay?" Caleb paused for a moment, then answered, "I think they'll remember, and sometimes remembering is enough to start a change." The words drifted into the sound of honking taxis and the urgent rhythm of the city. Across the street, a small grocery store had just opened. A sign swayed in the breeze. Fresh apples, local farm. Caleb looked at Lena, raising an eyebrow slightly. "Wanna test our luck?" She nodded, her lips curving into a quiet smile. They crossed the street, still hand in hand. People stepped aside, just as they would for any elderly couple moving slowly on a crowded sidewalk, not out of disrespect, but because no one imagined they had just walked out of a storm. The glass door opened with a soft chime. A young store clerk looked up and smiled out of habit. "Good morning, folks." "Good morning, dear," Lena replied, glancing around. The shop was bright, peaceful, filled with the scent of ripe apples, orange peels, and warm toast. Caleb walked to the fruit stand, picked up a red apple. He turned it slowly in his hand, his fingers feeling the smooth skin, thinking of the one that had been crushed beneath a boot just minutes ago. He handed it to Lena. "How's this one?" She looked it over, then smiled gently. "It's good." Then added softly, "As long as no one steps on it again." Caleb nodded. No need to say another word. In the end, it wasn't about the bag or the seat on the train. It wasn't about being shoved or struck or even disrespected. It was this, the small things: a single apple, a simple apology, an open seat are where people measure how much they truly respect one another. And if even one person is willing to stand up, then that decency can be preserved, even if only for a moment. That subway car continued its route like it did every day, past Lexington, then 68th Street, then into the dark curves of tunnels carved out over a century ago. But the people inside were no longer the same. The teen who had nervously started filming sat in silence, still holding his phone but not pressing any buttons. Not because there wasn't content, but because he now knew no video clip, no frame could ever capture what had just taken place. Not the blows, not the blood, but the silence. The silence when the whole train looked away. The silence when a bleeding old man stood tall. And the silence when he picked up a torn canvas bag and placed it into the hands of the only woman he had ever vowed to protect with his entire life. A middle-aged man removed his earbuds, his face buried in his hands, not crying, just thinking of his mother, and of the last time he ignored an elderly woman standing on a crowded bus. The young woman at the front of the train, the one who had nearly filmed for clout, quietly deleted the draft. She closed her phone, pulled her coat tighter, and stared at the apple that had rolled near her feet but never quite reached her hand. At the center of the car, the thug still sat slumped against the door, one hand clutching a dislocated elbow, lips trembling from pain, but his eyes vacant. Not from the fight, but because he had just witnessed something he couldn't comprehend. A man who didn't fight to win, but fought to keep others' silence from becoming complicity. Each person lost in thought, but no one spoke. The train was quiet, not the quiet of fatigue, but the quiet of a mind awakened. None of them knew who Caleb Monroe was. No social media profile, no hashtag created, no viral video, no news outlet reported the story. But in the heart of each person on that train, a question had taken root, and it couldn't be erased. If it were me, would I have the courage to stand up? The train doors opened at the next stop. New passengers got on. Others stepped off. But those who remained sat a little straighter, their eyes just a little different, because they had just witnessed something they might never see again for the rest of their lives. Not a fight, not some badass movie scene, but this, a man living true to his dignity without needing anyone's permission. No one captured that fully. No camera angle preserved that look when Caleb asked his wife, "Are you okay?" "Just a little," she said. But it didn't need to be recorded, because what truly touches people doesn't need to be stored as data. It lives in memory, and if the memory is real enough, it never fades. A mother leaned down and asked her daughter, "Do you know why today is different from every other day?" The child looked around, hesitant, because today someone dared to stand up. The mother smiled and nodded. And sometimes, just one person is enough to remind the whole world that silence is not the answer. As Caleb and Lena turned down a quiet corner, where the first bakery of the day cast golden light onto the sidewalk, everything was still the same. A city bus honked its horn, speeding through a yellow light. A delivery man slipped in a puddle and swore under his breath. An elderly woman wrestled her cart up onto the curb. No one recognized the tall, slender man in the cowboy hat, who had just walked away from an unnamed battle. No one knew that the tiny woman with trembling hands clutching a bag of fruit had changed the way an entire train thought about silence. No one stopped. No one asked for a photo. No one offered praise. And that was the most beautiful thing of all, because not every story needs to be told. Not every hero needs a spotlight. Sometimes, the world doesn't need to know who you are as long as you know who you are. They entered a small, familiar cafe. The owner, an old Italian man, looked up and smiled when he saw them. The usual one cappuccino and one Americano. Caleb nodded. Lena sat by the wooden chair near the window, setting the fruit bag on the table, now holding only one apple and a faint red smudge of strawberry jam. The cafe owner didn't notice the dried blood on Caleb's temple, or if he did, he didn't ask. He just made the coffee like he did every Monday morning. Caleb pulled a handkerchief from his coat pocket and gently wiped the dried blood away. Lena watched him, her eyes softening, no longer afraid, only grateful, not because he had protected her, but because he had never let her face anything alone, not even in moments when it would have been easier to turn away. "Do you think," Lena asked, "anyone will tell the story of this morning?" Caleb was quiet, then took his first slow sip of coffee. "If they need to, they'll remember." Outside the window, a little girl zipped by on a bike. A young couple argued over forgetting a wallet. A man sprinted for the subway, late for work. Everything seemed the same, and yet nothing quite was. Somewhere underground, a train still ran. But maybe, tomorrow morning, someone will stand to offer their seat to an elder. Someone else will speak up when they see something wrong. And somewhere, a 13-year-old boy will grow up with a memory etched clearly into his mind that he once saw an old man rise, not to fight, but to teach the world how to listen when a woman had been hurt. A morning that seemed ordinary. Just a trip for a few apples, a jar of jam, a loaf of bread, and yet it made an entire train relearn what respect really means. At exactly 8:32 a.m., Caleb and Lena left the cafe. They stepped down the stoop and rejoined the rhythm of New York life, a city that never waits for anyone. No one noticed the man who had just protected a woman not with fists, but with the most powerful silence of all the silence of character. Not a hero, not a legend, not the one who won the fight, just a husband who knew that if he didn't stand up, no one else would do it for her. Caleb left no statement, wrote no status, didn't appear in the news, but that morning he left behind something far greater, a quiet legacy, the kind of legacy not found in history books, but carved into the hearts of those who witnessed it, the kind that doesn't earn fame, but changes how a child sees courage, the kind that doesn't need applause, only the respectful silence of an entire subway car. Later that afternoon, a young man, the one who had recorded the video, sat alone on a park bench. He replayed a short clip, just a few seconds long, where Caleb asked, "Do you have a mother?" He paused the video, didn't share it, didn't post. He simply saved it as a reminder. When silence means complicity, be the first to break it. And somewhere else in the city, a young man, one of those Caleb had brought to the ground, sat in an urgent care clinic, hand bandaged, head bowed. A nurse asked, "Who hit you?" He didn't answer right away. He just whispered, uncertain whether it was an explanation or a confession. "An old man. I can't bring myself to look in the eye again." Then he said nothing more. Back in the small Harlem apartment, Lena opened the kitchen cabinet. She took down the torn canvas bag, folded it gently. She didn't wash it. She didn't throw it out. She hung it beside the oven where every morning began, and she pinned a sticky note above it, written in thin, wobbly handwriting. "One person standing is enough." Caleb saw it and smiled. He didn't ask about it. He just poured her coffee, like every ordinary Tuesday morning, because to him the most important things don't need to be said. They only need to be done at the right time. If you've ever felt too small to make a difference, remember this: a man not famous, not powerful by doing the right thing at the right moment, brought an entire train to silence. You don't have to be a hero. You just have to make sure no one has to fall alone.